Is your name John Alexander Dickman? That is so. You are married? That is so. You have a son and daughter? That is so. Do you live with your wife and children in this city? Yes, I've lived in Newcastle all my life. What is your occupation? I used to be a company secretary to a syndicate. They owned a colliery at Morpeth. Morpeth in Northumberland, about 14 miles from here. 15 to be exact. Did you give up your position with that syndicate? No, I didn't give it up. They sold the colliery. There was no position then. My last work for them was to negotiate the sale. That being when? 4 years ago. How have you lived since? By betting mostly, for myself and on commission. Did that bring you in enough money to live on? Yes, I've had a bad spell now and again, but I've been quite lucky on the whole. The setting for these questions is the old Moot Hall on Tyneside, where Lord Coleridge, a famous judge, sits upon the bench. The year is 1910. For dynastic historians, the year Edward VII died and George V succeeded. For racing enthusiasts, the year Lemberg won the Derby. And for students of crime, the year of John Alexander Dickman. Now telling his story in the witness box. Replying to Mitchell Innes, his defender. I think you know Mr. William Hogg, who was given evidence. I know him well, says Dickman. I've known him a long time. Is he a contractor? That is so. Last winter, was he engaged in sinking operations, sinkings in the Morpeth area for coal? Yes, he was. Did you go to see him at the sinkings several times? I did. For any special purpose? I was acting on behalf of an interested party. A party interested in the sinkings? That is so. Did you ever make an appointment with Hogg, let him know you were coming? No, it wasn't necessary. I knew he'd be there, and he was always glad to see me. Mitchell Innes pauses, a calculated pause, to show the introductions over, to show their coming to the pith. Had you in mind, he asks, to visit Hogg at the sinkings on the 18th of March? I had. Was it a Friday? It was. Tell us your movements on that Friday, right from the very start. Dickman composed, assured, methodical. I left my home about 10 a.m., took a tram to Central Station, caught the 10:27. Is that a stopping train to Alnmouth? Yes, more than a dozen stops. Is one of them Stannington? Yes, it's about halfway, after you pass Heaton, and then 4 or 5 others. Was Stannington your most convenient stop when visiting Hogg? Yes, nearest the sinkings. At Newcastle Central, did you buy a ticket? Yes, in the main hall. A ticket for Stannington. Return. In the circumstances, this is vitally important, Dickman not disputing he travelled on that train upon that date, because another man had travelled on it too. A man who'd got on, but never got off alive. A man who'd met his death, a violent death, upon that train. A man whom Dickman is now charged with murdering. This other man was John Nisbet, a colliery cashier, based at his firm's head office in Newcastle. On the 18th of March, a Friday, you'll remember, it being payday, he set off, as he regularly did, he set off on that train to take the wages out for the miners on the spot. A large sum, large total, nearly £400. All in cash, all carried in a small leather bag. Nisbet intended to go further on than Stannington, 4 stops further, close to his pit head. But Nisbet didn't show up at the stop, didn't show up at the pit head. Only when the train reached the terminus at Alnmouth, only when the foreman there inspected the compartments, no corridor, of course, entirely separate compartments, only then his failure to show up was explained. The foreman, led by rivulets of blood, found Nisbet's body, thrust under a seat, 5 bullet wounds puncturing the head. The bag with the cash, had disappeared. An obvious murder, and one could pin down where and when the murder had been done. A friend of Nisbet's, walking away from the train at Stannington, had seen him in his compartment. They'd exchanged a nod, a wave. Another person, looking around for a seat that suited him, he'd peered into that compartment during the train's long stop at Morpeth, and seen nobody, nothing, there was no one sitting there. So it was clear, wasn't it, clear as clear could be, that Nisbet had been murdered between Stannington and Morpeth. Morpeth, the very next stop up the line. Murdered. No Sherlock Holmes required to deduce that. But who was the murderer? A much more complex problem. Can the Crown bring it home? Bring it home to Dickman? Dickman, whom they've accused. Dickman, whom they've put on trial. They, the Crown, depend on what's called identification. They need to establish the identity of a man. There was a man, there must have been a man, who'd travelled with Nisbet in the same compartment. For that man, it stands to common sense, to reason, that man and the murderer, they weren't 2, they were 1. To prove that Dickman was the other man in the compartment, the Crown are offering a chain of interlocking links. One chap who knew both Nisbet and Dickman said he saw them at Newcastle going towards the train. No more than that, going towards the train together. One chap who knew Dickman but didn't know Nisbet said he saw Dickman going towards the train at Newcastle with a slightly built man, slightly built as Nisbet was. 2 chaps who knew Nisbet but not Dickman said they saw Nisbet going towards the train at Newcastle with a man one of them afterwards identified as Dickman. And oh yes, I'd almost forgotten, there was Mrs. Nisbet. She'd popped out, a habit, a nice, affectionate habit, to say hello to her husband when the train pulled up at Heaton, where they lived. A second man, she said, had been in Nisbet's compartment. Collar turned up, obscured in shadows, she'd hardly noticed him. But she identified him now. Identified the accused. Dickman has listened to it all impassively, only sometimes a slight shake of his head. "Did you know Nisbet?" Mitchell Innes says. "As a casual acquaintance, yes." "Did you know what his job was?" "No." "Or where it took him?" "No." "Or what he took with him?" "No." Mitchell Innes, trying to spike the guns he knows are primed. "Did you see Nisbet on that day?" "In the booking hall." "Did you see him afterwards?" "No." "You didn't then travel in the same compartment?" "No." "So far as you're aware, what happened after the train left Newcastle?" Dickman, still composed, still assured, still methodical. "I was reading a racing paper. Grand National Day, you know. I got engrossed. So much so I missed my stop. I went past Stannington." "How far?" "Only just beyond. That big swerve before Morpeth. Everyone knows it. Put me to rights. So I cut my losses and got out." At Morpeth. You got out at Morpeth. Yes. I paid the excess fare. Everything legal, you see, everything perfectly legal. As legal, as blameless as everything Dickman did after he'd passed the barrier out of Morpeth Station. According to his own account. On oath. I decided to walk back from Morpeth, walk back to the sinkings. They weren't so much further from there than they were from Stannington, and I wanted to look at another sinking too, but I was taken with stomach pains on the way, so I went into a field, and presently I lay down. I ended up in such a state, I returned to Morpeth, and I took the next train home. So you never reached the sinkings? No. Never saw Hogg? No. Now the defender must deal with something really crucial, as crucial perhaps as any matter that confronts him. Nearly 3 months after the murder, barely 3 weeks before the trial, Nisbet's bag was accidentally discovered at the foot of a colliery airshaft, 2 miles southeast of Morpeth. An airshaft easily reached from the main road. The bag, still locked, had been slit open, and the cash had gone. This discovery did more than confirm that robbery was the motive for the murder. As Crown Counsel said, if the murderer did get out at Morpeth, highly probable, wouldn't he go along this road until he got to the airshaft, and wouldn't he throw the bag down, hoping to bury it? Forever? The inference, it's almost irresistible, but it stops short of finality against Dickman. Others may have got out at Morpeth. Others may have come to the same airshaft. Conceivable. Stretching coincidence, but conceivable. The defender takes the bull by the horns. It's his only course. Dickman, did you go on that road? No, I did not. Did you throw anything down that airshaft? No, I did not. Did you go anywhere near that airshaft? I don't know where it is. Did you drop a bag down any airshaft? No, I did not. Mitchell Innes taking a step back. Full space for the climax. Dickman, did you murder Nisbet? I did not. Or lay a hand on him? I did not. Mitchell Innes sits down. Marks the end of Dickman's examination in chief, or to use the American term, direct examination. Marks the end of his interrogation by his own counsel, trying to bring out points to his advantage. What will follow is his interrogation by counsel for the Crown, trying to bring out points to his disadvantage. But that ordeal for Dickman, it's delayed a while, for it's now past noon on the second day of the trial, and the court is going to take its customary break. Let's use this break to consider how things stand. At the present stage, let's try to assess the evidence. When I say the evidence, I mean what we haven't got, as well as what we have. Gaps may be no less significant than substance. For example, the gun that the murderer must have used, that's not been traced to Dickman. Actually, not been traced at all. For example, the large sum in cash the murderer must have taken, that's not been traced either. Not been traced to Dickman. Though he was arrested within 3 days of the murder, though he was searched and his home was searched and his garden was dug up. Those are conspicuous gaps. Now what of the substance? In other words, how strong is the identification? Strong enough to satisfy impartial arbiters that Dickman's guilt is proved, beyond reasonable doubt, as English law demands? Well, you can decide as well as anyone. You have heard the evidence, the material evidence, and you are impartial, untouched by preconceptions. I wish I could feel the same about the jury, because prejudice throughout the whole locality had been rampant. Prejudice excited rather by the crime than by what can be put against the alleged criminal. It showed itself from the hour of his arrest and took shocking forms before he ever stepped into the dock. When he was driven from jail to court, thousands lined the route to hiss and boo at the windowless police van. The jury are recruited from the same area as the hissers and the booers. Hard to believe none of them have been similarly infected. So after the break there's of anticipation when Prosecutor Tyndall Atkinson gets up to cross-examine. I understood you to say you knew the murdered man. As a casual acquaintance, Dickman reiterates. Did you know his name? If I'd been asked, do you know Nisbet, I could only have said yes if I'd been given a description. Tyndall Atkinson, looking puzzled, rather elaborately puzzled. Did you know his name? He wasn't an individual who was in my mind at all. I didn't ask you that. The rebuke, the sharpening tone, their warning signs. I didn't ask you that. It's a plain question. Did you know this man by name? The jury watch intently. Dickman hesitates. Yes, I did know him by name. Although it was merely a preliminary skirmish, Tyndall Atkinson has scored in that exchange, scored heavily. Dickman may have been betrayed into excessive caution, fearing such an expert cross-examiner. But his avoiding a straight answer twice in succession, it did look like a tendency to prevaricate. Did harm to what lawyers call his credit, the weight which his testimony will carry from now on. From now on, as more and more decisive themes are raised. You have been connected, you told us, with a colliery. You would know then that wages are normally paid on Fridays. Yes? You would know then that the money would have to be drawn from a bank. Yes? And carried by someone to the colliery. That is so. Dickman regaining confidence. Yes, I've done that myself often enough, taken the wages. They are usually carried in a bag of some sort. Yes. You might think, from a glance, Tyndall Atkinson was relaxing. A very handsome man with a genial expression. Not put on, he was genial. In private life. But that's another world. Didn't pull punches in court. Any more than a genial surgeon throws away his knife in the operating theatre. Am I right about this? That you also travelled by rail to Stannington exactly a fortnight before the 18th of March? Yes, on the 4th of March. That is so. To see Hogg? Yes, who was always glad to see you. Why pick another Friday? A faint hint that Dickman might have made a trial trip to study every detail of a Friday journey. Why did you pick another Friday? Because Hogg would be paying wages. What had that to do with you? Nothing particularly. Had it anything to do with you? Only in one respect. In what respect? I wanted to find out whether Hogg was receiving some of his wage money from a Mr. Christie. Christie? He's a man I know. I'm not following. When counsel say they are not following, witnesses should look out. Why take the trouble to go to Stannington to see if this Mr. Christie was supplying money to Hogg? To see if he was bluffing? What do you mean by that? Saying he'd got no money. Christie saying so? Yes. Tyndall Atkinson shrugs his shoulders sceptically, almost inviting the jury to shrug theirs. On the 18th, the day of Nisbet's murder, did anyone travel with you in your compartment? I couldn't swear, says Dickman, but I think so, yes. Do you know who they were? No. How many there were? No. What they were like? No. Whether men or women? I didn't observe them. Step by step, the going for Dickman's getting tougher. When you found you'd overrun your station, Stannington, you set out to walk back from Morpeth. That is so. You could have got a train. I could. Why didn't you? I wanted to kill two birds with one stone. A friend had asked me to have a look at this other sinking I mentioned. Halfway it was between Morpeth and Stannington. If I'd got off at Stannington, I'd have walked back to Morpeth, so walking back from Morpeth, I was doing it in reverse. Tyndall Atkinson looks at a map, at Dickman, at the jury. Who was the friend who wanted you to have a look at this other sinking? Dickman frowns. Have I got to disclose names? Why not? It can do no harm. Dickman thinks it over. Mr. Holsworth, he says. Of Newcastle? Yes. Had you arranged with him to see it, this other sinking, on that day? I had not. Did he know you were going to see it on that day? He did not. Tyndall Atkinson drops to cruising speed. He can afford to. How much money had you got in early March? Early March? Yes, early March. The weeks before the murder. How much money had you got? Money at your disposal? So we've come to motive. Prosecutions never have to prove a motive, but they're greatly strengthened, reinforced, if they do. Tyndall Atkinson is resolved to secure that reinforcement. How much money had you got in the week before the murder? A long silence from Dickman has made counsel repeat the question. Oh, about 110 to 120 pounds. I suggest that's untrue. That you virtually had nothing. Your suggestion's wrong. Where was this 110 to 120 pounds? In a reserve fund which I kept for a special purpose. What purpose? Betting. Where did you keep this fund? It was known only to myself. Tyndall Atkinson ignores the manifest evasion. He has stronger cards to play. In October, 5 months before the murder, did you approach a firm in Newcastle, the Cash Accommodation and Investment Company? Yes. They are moneylenders. They lend money, yes. You borrowed money from them. That is so. Were you in want of money? No. Why borrow then? I wanted to test their advertised rates of interest. Let us be quite clear. It is quite clear already, but this is a legitimate device for emphasis. Let us be quite clear. You borrowed from them when you were not in need of money, simply to see if their advertisements were true. That is so. How much did you borrow? £20 for 3 months. Was the interest £1 a month? That is so. I paid the interest regularly. I'm not saying you didn't. But in January, 2 months before the murder, did you go and obtain an extension of that loan? That is so. It's his familiar phrase, but less defiant, more subdued. An extension for a further 3 months. That is so. On the ground that you weren't then in a position to repay. I continued to pay the interest regularly. I know you did. Tyndall Atkinson, almost triumphant. I know you did. Was your last payment of interest on 17th March? It may have been. It was, wasn't it? It was on the day before the murder. There's no more to be squeezed out of that episode, but there are others. Do you know a Mr. Ketterer? Yes. Is he a jeweller? Yes. Did you go to see him in February, a month before the murder? Yes. Did you borrow £5 from him on some jewellery? I didn't borrow it. Didn't you? What did you do? I said to him, give me £5 and here's something to show, I'll pay you back. Oh. Did you deposit with Mr. Ketterer a scarf ring and some links? Yes, I was putting them in a place of safety. What? Tyndall Atkinson, as if he can't trust his ears. Yes, there'd been some burglaries in our neighbourhood. Is that the reason why you went to Mr. Ketterer? Yes, partly. Dickman floundering. I used to leave those things lying about the house. It wasn't safe. You weren't in want of money. I was not. On the 1st of March, 18 days before the murder, did you pawn a pair of field glasses? Pawn them for 12 shillings? Yes, I took them to sell, but when I couldn't, I left them in pawn. You weren't in want of money? No. Then why leave them in pawn? I've pawned things before, says Dickman, without being in want of money. I see, says Tyndall Atkinson, pushing back his wig. I see. He couldn't have asked or hoped for a more effective curtain. The jury's decision was, it had to be, unanimous. I need hardly say that they found Dickman guilty. Lord Coleridge pronounced sentence, the inevitable sentence, in words that might have chilled the stoutest heart. You had no pity on the victim whom you slew. It is only just that Nemesis should overtake you now. The punishment is death. But Dickman wasn't crushed. He wouldn't make a servile exit. He wouldn't bow humbly to the grandeur of the law. He turned round, back to the judge, face forward to the crowd rejoicing in the verdict, the crowd that hated him. I declare, he shouted with a sweeping gesture, I declare to you and all men, I am innocent. Was he? Was he innocent? The man who met his death that August on the gallows? You may say I'm dodging, like Dickman dodged from time to time in the box. And I couldn't altogether blame you if you threw this at me. But I can only give you the best answer that I can. And the best answer I can give is this. Yes, I believe that Dickman did it. But no, I'm not sure they proved he did.